When the word spread that General Lee and his Confederate Army were moving north, fear settled over the towns like a heavy fog. From the quiet porches of Maryland to the rolling fields of Pennsylvania, people watched the roads nervously, wondering if the war that had torn the South would now crash to their own streets and farms. Shops closed early, families packed wagons, and church bells rang, not for service, but as warnings. Some hoped the rumors were wrong, while others saw the gray uniforms on the horizon and knew their world was about to change. For many citizens, Lee's advance wasn't just a military move, it was the war finally coming home. As the Confederate Army drew closer to Gettysburg, the Slyder family found themselves in a quiet panic. Their home sat close to the southern edge of town, near the slopes of Big Round Top, far too close to where the fighting might spill over. The sky felt heavier, the roads busier, with the sound of distant movement and nervous whispers. With little time and no certainty of return, the Slyders packed what they could carry and left their footsteps quick, but their hearts heavy. Behind them, their home stood still, soon to be swallowed by the storm of war. The trees and hills, the very ground they'd known all their lives, were about to become a part of something far bigger and far more terrifying. On July 1st, 1863, the Slyder Farm sat quietly at the southern end of the Gettysburg battlefield, nestled near the base of Big Round Top. That day, while heavy fighting raged from the north and west of town, the Slyder family had already fled their home, fearing the advancing Confederate Army. Their farm, complete with a sturdy stone house, barns, and fields, stood eerily empty as the sounds of battle grew louder in the distance. Though the area remained untouched on the first day, its quiet would not last. By the next day, Confederate troops would sweep across the property as part of Longstreet's assault, turning the peaceful farm into a war-torn staging ground. By the morning of July 2nd, the peaceful stillness around the Slyder Farm had vanished. Union soldiers from Brigadier General J.H. Hobart Ward's brigade moved onto the property, setting up defensive positions and using the farm buildings and stone walls for cover. Artillery and musket fire soon echoed through the hills as Confederate troops from John Bell Hood's division advanced from the west. Fierce fighting broke out in the nearby woods and rocky slopes of Devil's Den, just a short distance from the Slyder barn. Soldiers rushed through the Slyder orchard and past the farmhouse, turning the quiet family land into a battleground. The fields were trampled, fences smashed, and buildings damaged by shot and shell. As the day wore on, the Slyder family, once a simple home and workplace, became part of one of the fiercest struggles of the entire Battle of Gettysburg. On the afternoon of July 2nd, 1863, the Slyder Farm was caught in the middle of one of the fiercest attacks on the Battle of Gettysburg. Around 4 p.m., Confederate forces under Brigadier General Evander Law, part of John Bell Hood's division, advanced eastward from Warfield Ridge, moving directly across the Slyder property towards Devil's Den and Little Round Top. The farm, abandoned by the Slyder family days earlier, became part of the Confederates' route of attack. Union skirmishers from the 124th New York, known as the Orange Blossoms, and other elements of Ward's brigade had set up positions behind the stone walls and near the farm buildings to delay the assault. Musket and artillery fire erupted as the Confederates swept through the fields and terrain around the Slyder orchard and barn, quickly turning deadly. The 4th and 5th Texas, as well as the 44th and 48th Alabama, fought hard to push through the resistance, moving over the rough sloped ground while Union sharpshooters fired from cover near the barn and outbuildings. The farm structure, fences, and woodlots were damaged or flattened as soldiers fought hand-to-hand in some areas. The Slyder orchard was trampled, and stray cannon shots from both Union and Confederate batteries tore into the surrounding fields. By evening, the Confederates had taken the ground near the farm, pressing forward towards Devil's Den and the slopes of Little Round Top, but at a heavy cost. Slyder Farm, once a quiet homestead, had become chaotic and bloody path in the struggle for the Union left flank.
better ne'er been born that gets in Stonewall's way.
After the fighting swept past on July 2nd, the Slyder Farm lay in ruins. Confederate troops used the property briefly as a staging area while they pushed towards Devil's Den and Little Round Top. But by nightfall, the land was littered with the dead and wounded from both sides. Barns and fields had been smashed down for firewood or to make breastworks. Livestock was either shot or driven off, and the fields that once grew crops were turned into mud by thousands of boots and hooves. The Slyder family, who had fled in fear before the battle, returned after the guns fell silent to find their homes scarred by musket fire and cannon shot. Their orchard ruined, and their farm stripped of food and supplies, like so many Gettysburg families. The Slyders were left to pick through the wreckage of battle, forced to rebuild their lives on the ground that had become forever tied to the nation's bloodiest struggle. In the weeks after the battle, the Slyder family faced the heartbreaking task of rebuilding. Their farm's buildings had been riddled with bullets, fences tore down, and nearly all their crops destroyed. Neighbors recalled that the Slyders, like many Gettysburg families, first had to bury the dead soldiers and animals left behind, as the stench of decay filled the summer air. The barns and outbuildings were patched as best they could, but it took months before the property was even partly restored to working order. Livestock had to be repurchased, new tools acquired, and fields reseeded. The orchards, scarred by cannon fire and stripped by soldiers, took years to recover, if it ever truly did. By the following spring, some normal farming had resumed. The reminders of the battle remained everywhere. Unexploded shells were sometimes plowed up, and bones from soldiers and horses surfaced for years after. The emotional repair was slower. Catherine Slyder never forgot the devastation she saw when returning home, and the children grew up with the memory of their farm turned battlefield. It took nearly a decade for the farm to return to steady productivity, and even then, the shadow of July 1863 lingered.